Hi, Ken. Thank you for taking this time out of your busy schedule to do this interview with me. One of the major undertones of my business, Be Who You Want to Be, is this concept of transforming bullying. It's something that really underpins my philosophy and methodology. And there, such a hot topic of debate at the moment and a very contentious issue all over the world. I've seen it popping up all over the place. There's so many initiatives out there that are aimed at trying to eradicate or erase bullying completely. And I felt it would be absolutely necessary to share your insights and professional experience and knowledge in this area. So what I'd like to do with everyone, I guess, I interview is just ask them to share a little bit about their background and what they do before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the topic. So in saying that, can you share with all of us a little bit about yourself and what you actually do?
Well, I'm a board-certified psychologist. I've been at it for about 30 years now. I have a private practice. I take clients 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday, I do the other stuff I call it, which is I write. I do seminars. I have a website, and I have a mental health center website just came online about a month ago, which is intending to build an audience for the ideas that I share. And I think I was trained in traditional psychology, and what I found was that bits and pieces of some theories were useful, but none was complete. And so then I started looking at people who were doing what I call the cutting edge stuff. And I got to do some work and actually studied quite a bit with Dr. William Glasser, who has developed choice theory and reality therapy, which is a kind of a world-renowned model. He's probably one of the last surviving fathers of modern psychology, and he's 80-something now, a nice man and very, very insightful guy. So I was part of his institute in Los Angeles for many years. And then I started studying NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and did some work with Bandler and some of their stuff. And of course, let's go back. First, what Glasser was saying was that we have these needs, biological and psychological needs, which are genetically encoded, and we are compelled to meet them. And basically what he said was we use behaviors to do that, and every behavior has 4 parts. A doing, a thinking, which creates a feeling and a physiology. So what he said was that we actually have virtually total self-control of how we feel. All we do is take control of our thinking. Well, I like that idea. I took that and I went into NLP and discovered that field was looking at if we take control of our thinking, we can control many of our what we call negative thought patterns, phobias and fears and like limited thinking. And that was interesting, and of course their work is a testament to the human imagination, which of course is phenomenal. However, what I noticed was that the limitation I saw in that work was that they were trying to be positive. They were trying to be happy.
Right.
And I thought that's a little short-sighted in my mind. So then I started looking around some more, and I found the work of Dr. John Demartini, who you're familiar with, I'm sure. So yes. What John was saying, which I liked, was that the only thing we know for sure is we're part of a huge universe which has certain fundamental laws, which all of our hard sciences study every day. So physics, chemistry, biology, cosmology, astronomy, geology, they study the hard sciences and they use, quote, the empirical method to prove they're true. And then they spread that information around. And what John basically said was, well, we're part of that system and therefore those laws apply to us. So the law of balance or symmetry, if you like, applies to relationships. It applies to parenting. It applies to illness and all that stuff. So I was fascinated by not just his approach to it, but his humility about it. And then he said, this isn't my stuff. This is just science. And we're all part of it. Let's all look at it together and learn from it. So, and from that, of course, he developed a tool which you can take in clinical psychology, and basically you can take anyone with a one-sided perception of pain without pleasure, and if they're open to learning, because all therapy is focused, accelerated learning, you can take them and help them uncover the 2 sides. And when they uncover the 2 sides, they grow in self-appreciation. They grow in self-love, if you like. So taking that idea, I was playing around with, I spent 15 years in early childhood education. I used to train people to work in daycare centers and kindergartens. And we used to have a 2-year program. It was a competency-based system, which means the students had to prove they could do something. They didn't just have to know it, they had to be able to prove it. So I took that because we taught a lot of preschool kids who were, quote, bullying other kids. You know, the 4-year-olds bullying the 3-year-olds, that kind of stuff. And at that time, we said, these kids need to learn social skills. We didn't call them bullies, we called them kids that need to learn something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we dealt with it. So I took some of John's ideas and the way he was looking at it, and I co-authored a book with a colleague of mine who we were in early child education for many years together, and we wrote this book called The Dance of Bullying. And in it, all it does is take and apply the laws of physics, if you like, to the phenomena of what society calls bullying.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now bullying is labeled for any kind of disrespect. So it's gone way beyond that. And of course, if you like, the illusion many people carry is that they're not bullies, or that, first of all, they were never bullied and they don't bully other people, which is interesting.
That's correct.
Kind of limited look at the world, but bullying, what we call bullying, is just a social learning tool that everybody experiences, and humans have been using it forever. So it's just a tool for learning. And when you treat it that way, and you don't get into labeling people either as the perpetrator or the victim, you become much more effective and decisive in resolving the confusions around what we call bullying. And that's what I've done. I work with my youngest clients are 5, my oldest clients are 85.
Wow.
And the topic is often some form of bullying, you know, whether it's the in-laws or the outlaws, you know. So that's kind of where I come from to it. And so I have the privilege of I have 8 siblings, 4 brothers and 4 sisters.
Wow.
So bullying and being bullied and bullying other people is part of my childhood.
Yeah, well, with a big family like that, I can
Oh, yeah.
only imagine.
So does that answer your question? It's a long answer, but
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you. It's kind of answered some of the other stuff, which is great. But what we'll do is just expand on some of those ideas. So you mentioned you've co-authored the book about the bullying dynamic called The Dance of Bullying. It's what it is really like a breakthrough tool for teachers and parents. And I've had a read of it, and I think it's really inspired, and definitely content that I believe is necessary to be out there to help teachers and parents and deal with the situation in their own lives. So I guess you've kind of answered the question about where you kind of got the inspiration to do this. But what really is the book about? What's the general overview of the book?
Here's how I approached it. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren now, and I remember vividly in my work in early child education. I used to direct a infant daycare center. We had 15 infants under 2 years of age many years ago, and I had the privilege of being around kids a lot. And what I noticed is when a child is born, they're born believing they can be anything, do anything, and have anything. Every child born is called, in psychology, calls the will to live or whatever.
Right.
So each person is born believing that they can deal with anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then they negotiate with the giants around them, and they pick up perceptions from the giants that they are somehow not that.
Mm-hmm.
And as and to survive, they pick those up and they integrate them, and then they spend, in a sense, the rest of their life uncovering the truth, which is that they can be, do, and have anything.
Right.
So if you talk to a 3-year-old and an 83-year-old, they have very similar attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
So I once asked a 3-year-old, I said, "Are you a genius?" And her name was Sally. She was about 3.5. She said, "Yep." I said, "Okay." I said, "So can you do anything?" She said, "Yep." I said, "Could you be the boss of all of Canada?" And she goes, "Yep." That was her attitude, right?
Absolutely.
So if you got an 83-year-old who's sat back and said, "Well, I've lived 83 years and I've learned some stuff." I met a woman named Lily McNamara in the Houston airport several years ago, and she was a war bride to Canada in 1945. And she was 78 at that point. It was a very small, short woman, very lively and very friendly. We were waiting for the Air Canada flight, and we're talking, and I was told her what I did for a living, and she was telling me about her life, and she said she was a widow, and she had one surviving sister in Houston, and she lived 3 months with her each year, and she lives in Toronto herself. And I said, can I ask a question? I said, I'm always curious to ask people who have lots of time on the planet. I said, how would you assess your whole life, all 78 years? And she goes, well, Ken, I was through the war. I came to Canada knowing one person, my husband. I said, yeah, I understand that. She said, I had 2 children. One died of leukemia when he was 10. I said, I understand. Yeah, I remember you mentioned that. She said, my other son lives across town and he visits, but he's married with no children, so I'm not a grandparent. But I live in a seniors complex and I have friends there. And I said, yeah. She said, and I have only one sibling left. I said, yeah. I said, but how would you assess your whole life? And she said, well, I've had some terrible tragedies and I've had some wonderful moments, but it's my life. I wouldn't change a moment of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's wisdom, right? That's a wise person.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where we're all heading. So when we get bullied, bullying is one of the tools that we're using to uncover our own wisdom.
Right.
So when we intervene, what I was endeavoring to do with the book was to show parents and educators, if you intervene with the attitude, it's just a learning opportunity for everybody. The bully needs to learn respect for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Bully needs to learn respect for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they unconsciously gravitate towards each other because of the laws of nature, so they can learn and survive. And that's what's going on. So I wanted to try and capture that in the book. That was my intent.
Great.
So, so since it's not a bestseller, I guess it didn't work.
Well, it's the type of content, in my opinion, that takes a little bit of time to get traction, purely because of a lot of the societal beliefs around the concept of bullying. So, in essence, this is what I'm aiming to try and achieve through my business, and obviously by connecting with people like yourself who've done work in this area, to really take this message to the masses instead, and see if we can do something to actually really shift the whole dynamic around and take a lot of that energy that's been placed on it, because it's become like it's almost become like an industry in itself. So to kind of just take all that energy off it.
Throwing money at it, eh?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sometimes one of my colleagues said to me, we were talking about a child who was struggling with some social skills, and she said, all early childhood education is about is helping kids learn the consequences of their choices.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it's about. And I went, yeah, that's exactly it. So that's what bullying's about. It's about helping kids learn that if I do this, this will happen. If I do this, this will happen. What do I need to do? So it's, simplistic, but that's in a sense what we're all trying to do anyway.
Of course.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, when you ask people and when you chat to people out there and who've experienced bullying or who've witnessed it in their own lives, or who are in positions where they're kind of required to manage the situation where it's happening, the natural process for most people is to want to stop the whole process altogether. So
Yeah.
my question to you is that the wisest solution to deal with these challenges?
Actually, what it tends to do is mask the situation, and actually it tends to aggravate the situation. What I found useful for someone who's experiencing a lot of pain around bullying, since the laws of nature say that there are no mistakes in anyone's history, that means if I'm getting bullied, that means there's something I'm supposed to be learning. And it's about me, not about the bully.
Mm-hmm.
So my experience in working with people who have been bullied is that they usually have a piece, in a sense, a part of their life or a part of their self-perception that hasn't been developed fully. They don't realize they're a genius. They don't realize they can be, do, and have anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say things like this. I'll say, I want you to go to the. In fact, I'll tell you a story happening. I had a man not long ago. He would be 48, and he was bullied in a parking lot. Well, actually, it was in a story. Here's what happened. He was driving in traffic, and he was cut off by another car. and the car pulled into a parking lot to a store. So he went in behind and parked beside the person and went in the store. And he said, I want to tell him that was very dangerous and he could have hurt someone, not just me, but himself. He said, I was trying to, kind of just alert him to the. He said, I approached the man and told him, said my piece. He said, and that man bullied me verbally for 15 minutes in the front of everybody. It got so bad, he was so verbally abusive that the store clerk called the police.
Wow.
That's what happened. So this man went home and he hid in his home for 2 months. He wouldn't leave. His family called me to come see him, so I went to see him in his house. Anyway, so here we are. I'm in his living room. He hasn't been up in 2 months. I said, I want you to go back to the worst moment. I said, when that person was verbally abusing you in public in front of a whole bunch of people, when you were actually trying to alert him to the dangers of cutting people off. He goes, yeah. I said, okay, go to that second. No, that second, that worst moment, what did you do? What did you say to yourself or to him? He said, I just stood there and listened. I said, okay, you didn't actually try to defend yourself. He said, no. I said, so what did you say to yourself? And he stopped me with this long, pregnant pause. And he said, finally, he said, well, I said to myself, there's nothing I can say that's going to change this person's mind, but I'm not going to back down.
Mm-hmm.
So I just stood there, he said, and listened. He said, then I wrote to my car, and he wrote to his car, and he bumped into his car. The bully bumped into his car. It was just kind of bizarre. Anyway, so I said, you stood, so in a sense, you stood your ground. He said, yeah, I stood my ground. I said, okay, why is it so important for you to stand your ground at that moment, not just in that store, but in the rest of your life? And he had this long pause, and his eyes flushed. And he said, I'm in IT, and I'm being used as a gopher. I have all kinds of abilities, and my employer doesn't recognize them or challenge me or let me use my genius, my creativity. And I've been putting up with it for 2 years, and he went on this big thing, this kind of a rant, I said, so I said, there's other parts of life where you need to stand up for yourself besides with people that bully you in parking lots. He goes, yeah. I said, where else? And then he talked about his family and feeling bullied there. And he had this whole list of stuff.
Right.
So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I found that that's the story every time for people who are bullied. And you take the bully, it's the same thing. They are trying to protect themselves in some way. They just don't know how else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Because I mean, for me personally, that's what I found in my own reality. Because I was bullied quite a lot when I was growing up, and I've been able to work through that using the Demartini method and various other techniques that I've learned over the years. So I can definitely see the benefits of that and the reasons for that, which, when I talk about it with some of my clients or just people in general, and I almost advocate the necessity for the bully to some extent, not to the degree where it turns into violence. I don't necessarily advocate violence, but as being a solution. But I understand the reasoning for it. I understand the methodology behind it and the underlying intentions. And I've developed I guess a neutrality about that, and I truly understand the reasoning for it. And most people don't understand, particularly because I've been bullied. They go, how can you support the person who's hurt you? How can you do that? And just from my own experience, I'm grateful for those experiences, because I wouldn't be talking to you right now about this very interesting topic. That's the reality.
That's the beauty of John's work, is that he basically says, where's the blind side here? What are we missing? Mm-hmm. So if it looks like pain, where's the pleasure? Mm-hmm. And when I talked to that man, saw him, when he said, well, I need to stand up for myself in so many areas of my life, and his whole posture changed. His whole sense of self. So that was the other side. And people forget to ask that.
Right.
They're not victims. They're victors over the past because they're sitting there talking about it, which means that they can't be a victim. It's an illusion.
Of course.
It's a way of thinking that's just not really true. So, I mean, as you know, given the kind of stuff you're doing, we get the privilege of asking people questions that never occur to them, that when they entertain them, we have the privilege of watching them learn in front of our face.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, don't get any better than that, you know?
Absolutely.
We're observing that. So it's in that sense, it's like, I mean, it mentioned about violence too, which is kind of interesting because I'm about 135 pounds soaking wet. And so I grew up in a kind of a violent neighborhood, and when I was in high school, I witnessed a high school fight, and a guy get beat up, and it really terrified me.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I needed to defend myself. So I studied judo and karate and all these kinds of things, and to defend myself because I was afraid of violence. And when I was studying judo, I was sparring with a black belt in judo who was about 6'4" and about 250 pounds. And it was like sparring with a feather. It was like dancing with someone that really, you know, man. Anyway, but after we were talking, and he said to me, he said, "Why did you get interested in judo?" And I said, "Well, I experienced some violence as a kid, and I'm afraid of violence." He said, "Well, you study this stuff long enough, you'll find out that it isn't your body that makes you dangerous; it's your mind."
Uh-huh.
And he said, "You know, in the animal kingdom, there's nothing more dangerous than a female of any species protecting their young. Doesn't matter what the species."
Mm-hmm.
So he said, once you realize your brain is what makes you dangerous, then size doesn't matter. And once I learned that and proved it to myself, then you stop being afraid of violence. I mean, anything's a weapon, right? Anything.
Of course.
I read somewhere there's 15 different ways you can kill someone with a credit card. Go figure, right? So all of a sudden you say, oh, so therefore everybody has potential to protect themselves.
Yes.
If they believe they can.
Absolutely.
Now, in many cultures we say women are more fragile than men. Not in the animal kingdom. Maybe in some parts of the human kingdom, but not in the animal kingdom.
Right.
Does that make sense? So it's all about perception here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and I totally subscribe to that. So, I mean, that's definitely part of my thinking.